Welcome, Dice Goblins and Lore Masters, to a massive tier list video. You are welcome to watch whether you are a seasoned Symbaroum enjoyer or a tabletop newbie. In particular, if you're the latter, this should be a good introduction to the kinds of characters you can play in this dark fantasy role-playing game. Now, this tier list is a bit different from one for something like D&D. My use of the word class is a little misdirection because these are not truly classes but templates, ideas presented by the book for what your character could be. In many role playing games, you select a specific class which assigns you very particular powers as you level up. In Symbaroum, you spend experience points to build out your character from a vast menu of various martial and magical powers, meaning there are countless combinations. While this can lead to some very unique and powerful builds, figuring that all out from the beginning can be very difficult, and to that end, the developers provided concepts in the core rulebook and the advanced player's guide. And while I did consider using the word builds, these are not builds in truth because today we're not even figuring in for things like race, attributes, boons, burdens, and goals. There are four major archetypes: warrior, mystic, rogue, and hunter, which each template roughly falls into. Then there are specific templates in the form of occupations, and then even more structured prestige templates in the form of professions. This all totals up to 46 possible classes presented, which is not a nice round number, so I created four of my own custom classes to add to the mix. Which are the best? What is the most powerful, and what is not worth your time to play? That is what I'm hoping to answer with this tier list. But before we begin, I want to talk about how I built this list. If you don't care about looking behind the screen at my method and you just want to see the rankings, then this part is skippable. To start with, I knew I actually wanted to use my previous work to establish a rubric rather than just assigning each class a ranking based on feels. I've also been getting some nice feedback in the comments and insights from Reddit and wanted to incorporate some of that new information. That said, I'm not pretending this list will be an objective truth, and neither will yours. Any factor of gameplay can and will be adjusted by the table you are playing with and the story you want to tell. This is just me trying to establish a general idea of power levels for the general Symbaroum experience. Each ability, mystical power, and ritual will be reassessed for any changes before being assigned a number score: 10 for S, 9 for A, 8 for B, 7 for C, and 6 for D. Note that I won't be taking into account a feature's ranking within its own tier. There's no 9.5s or 7.3s, just a number for its tier. Now, many classes, particularly professions, offer a choice between two or more features. I considered just picking the highest rank option in each of these cases, but that would create a slippery slope of always picking the most effective tactic available, and this is not an optimized list of classes, but rather a guide to use the standard classes provided by the books. So I kept all options and took the average. Which means for classes that call for any mystical power or ritual, I needed to take an average for those as well. Core and advanced mystical powers combine to make a B, while rituals make a C. At first, I wasn't satisfied with this, so I began tiering out each mystical tradition separately, only to find that they are all pretty well balanced with the differences in the decimals. So I'm sticking with B for all powers and C for all rituals. I will take the average of all assigned features for a given archetype, occupation, or profession. The average will have its own letter grade, and we will rank each class from worst to best. However, there are important considerations for these classes other than just the mechanical strength of their individual parts. For that, I am adding 3 categories to add to the average score for each class. Number 1. Fantasy. Does the archetype, occupation, or profession depict a recognizable concept that players will want to latch onto? This is not to be confused with a popularity score. A common but boring archetype like warrior will get a low score, while a niche but evocative occupation like tattooed warrior will get a high score. Number 2. Lore. Does the class have power and respect in Symbaroum's lore? As pointed out in the comments, whether or not a sorcery power is strong will mean less in the face of the persecution the sorcerer will face in the story if they are found out. Meanwhile, something like a Templar or Wrathguard will demand respect and authority. Number 3. Fun. Is the class actually fun to play? Do the mechanics and flavor flow together to make for an overall enjoyable experience, or do the mismatch of powers and abilities fail to create a better time at the table? This category is the most subject to my own bias, but I'm going to try to consider all the other Symbaroumers I've played with and what they found enjoyable and what they struggled with. But I think the mechanics and features should shine through more than the flavor score. So, the flavor average only accounted for 25% of the overall final grade. Just because I rank something as top tier doesn't mean it's the right class for you to play in your next game. That's why there's no F tiers and nothing below a 6 on my list. Even the lowest class could be the perfect option for your own terms of fun and your own situation. For example, I ranked Siege Master very low because it is a niche ability, and naturally the Sapper is going to place lower as a result. But if your Game Master is running a Siege campaign, suddenly those options are going to get a major boost and be a very attractive choice. Now, let's take a minute to talk about those changes. I've made 6 tier list videos and assessed 181 features. I wasn't going to get them all right, so here's 14 rankings that have changed since I started. For starters, I ranked all of the Mystic Traditions in M tier because I thought it would be too difficult to properly rank them alongside other non magical abilities. But now I'm confident in grading them, so Sorcery is a B, Theurgy is S given its significant healing and damage boosts at Master level, Witchcraft is A, and Wizardry is A. Strangler was A, but moved up to S because there's just no way around it. Strangler is an overpowered ability at Novice level that only gets crazier at higher levels. Two-Handed Force was B, but is now A due to armor penetration at Master level. Marksman was B, but is now A for the same reason. Recovery was B, but has moved down to C due to seeing how much better Lay on Hands and Medicus are as recovery options. Quick Draw was C, but has moved down to D due to my intense dislike of requiring extra moves for switching weapons, let alone with a roll with a chance to fail. Holy Aura was A, but moved up to S due to me completely missing what I read as a burst effect is actually a multiple round wave of healing and damage. Entangling Vines was B, but moved up to A due to armor penetration. Curse was C, but once someone explained the intent to me, I moved it all the way up to A. Artifact Crafter was A, but moved down to B because while some minor artifacts are great, many are lackluster. Knife Play was B, but moved up to A after someone formally pled their case and I really gave it some thought. And I had no changes to the advanced mystical powers or rituals. You could chalk that up to recency bias, but I did do a thorough review, and I do think I just got better at assessing abilities against each other as I went along, so it makes sense that the latter ones are more accurate. Just a couple more things before the list. I wanted to show off the concept of each class through popular media examples, even if that media wasn't necessarily fantasy. Some of these capture the general idea of a class, but not so much the specifics. Others might be fun to dig into with their own unique classes. Above all, bear in mind that I am judging the Symbaroum class, not the popular characters on screen. Remember that when I place Charlie from Has Been Hotel above Saruman from Lord of the Rings. And finally, my channel isn't called True Sight because I have all the right answers all of the time. I am offering you some facts and insights from my own opinions and research, and you can take all that information and use it to form your own opinion. This goes double for a game like Symbaroum, where you are free to make your character with far fewer guidelines than something like D&D. Take this tier list as a guide for your next character rather than a prescription for what you and your friends need to play. We are starting out in D tier. These aren't outright bad classes, that would be an F tier, which I'm not including because I think the designers did a decent job even on the most lackluster of character concepts, and you can make a character work in the right party and the right campaign. But there's no denying that these next 7 classes are lacking in their mechanics, their flavor, or in most cases, both. Starting off our list with the worst class from the books is the self taught mystic. Sure, it's possible to make an incredible self taught mystic, but there's just not much going on here with the base class. You have no corruption reduction, so you'll have to be extremely selective with your powers and rituals. In the flavor department, Symbaroum's lore will consider you no better than an evil sorcerer, and I don't consider it very fun to work within the increased restrictions the lack of a tradition will give you, even though you picked this option with freedom on your mind. Still, I gave Self Taught Mystic a 10 in concept because so many people are drawn to the idea of forging their own path with mystical wonders. Unfortunately, the concept is not carried through by the execution, and that's why this is in last place. The artifact crafter is a pretty attractive concept. Lots of people liked crafting elements in video games, and I regularly saw that desire carry through in Dungeons and Dragons, which doesn't have a strong crafting element. So Symbaroum gives you some official rules for crafting, and I don't think they're very fun. Playing an artifact crafter means a lot more reading and accounting than the other players at your table, and the mechanical strength just doesn't match that added effort. The witch hunters of Symbaroum should be pretty strong, but instead, I think they're best relegated as an NPC goon squad. Their mechanical kit is unimpressive. The fantasy aspect carries an air of persecution and prejudice most people won't find appealing. The lore will consider you a means to an end, and even if you like the idea of hunting magic users, there's just a lot more fun and effective ways of going about it. In a game partly or entirely about wandering into a forest to hunt for treasure, the treasure hunter is about the most basic thing you could conceptualize. So it loses points on fantasy, although I gave it a slight bump on lore because talented treasure hunters would be valued and well paid no matter what faction your character comes from. Unfortunately, the mechanics don't do enough to sell the talented part, so you're left with something fairly bland. Sorcerers in Symbaroum have a bad reputation. The magic of the Dark Lords to the south and Dark Davokar to the north is based in sorcery, meaning that by picking this tradition, you are marking yourself as an enemy of all cultural beings and setting yourself on the path to become an abomination. While I know from experience that some players will be drawn to that outcast status and possibly trying to work against an assumed evil intent, the base kit for the sorcerer doesn't give you the tools you need to stand out from the average cultist waiting to be hanged for their crimes. The guild thief implies you have the backing of a group of thief friends, something a lot of folks will be drawn to, and something that could even be a basis for your Symbaroum adventuring party. While cheap shot and knife play are fun and effective abilities, I can't say the same for opportunist and trapper. This one can work, but it's going to take some effort, and for that effort, I'm not prepared to place Guild Thief higher. We arrive at our first profession, a specialized class focused on summoning beings and energies from the Yonder world to combat their foes. You can also see our first S tier ability, with Servant Daemon giving you a second character in the form of a very strong demon completely under your control. This is a mighty concept, both reading into the game with plenty of summoner characters and reading out of it with the unique lore and powers. Unfortunately, this is dragged down by being a sorcery profession with a few D tier features, landing it fairly low at the top of D tier. As we enter into C tier, I feel the inevitable need to address a certain phrase. The following classes are what I would call mid. They're not impressive, they're not terrible, they're just fine. Yes, the literal middle of this list would be B, but that's not accounting for the many D tier and F tier classes that an AI could make by trying to combine Symbaroum's various features, so the C tiers are still serviceable. Got that out of the way? Okay, let's talk about some mid classes. We begin C tier with the Illusionist, a fairly strong but slightly vague idea of the Trickster Mage. There's so much about this class and these powers that will depend on your imagination and what the game master will allow, which I think makes it very fun, but the lack of concrete reliability drags down the mechanics score. I think Illusionist is still a neat concept, and it's definitely one I would love to tinker with. Former cultist is a strange idea for a player character, and I struggled to find pop culture references for this one. I don't think it's something players will be drawn to, and the art doesn't really help. Within the lore, you're probably going to be tracked down by witch hunters and clansfolk alike, and I don't think the limited abilities offered are very fun to play. This is a novel idea from the developers, but it needs a lot of work, and for that, it stays in C tier. The symbolist profession is another novel concept, but a little hard to sell and give examples of. They seem to be well regarded within the lore, especially by the clansfolk, but the powers don't stack up to other mystic professions, and I don't think managing which letters you have in which scrolls and which locations is going to make for very fun play. There are some other symbolism powers that aren't represented here, and it's another one someone could tinker with to make something truly unique and effective. But going by the book, it's not all that impressive. Let's talk about a weird one. The Weapon Master is actually several subclasses rolled into one page. You obviously won't take all abilities here, but I felt the need to take the average for what the Advanced Player's Guide presented as one concept. The abilities Sword Saint, Flailer, and Axe Artist drag this class down, but even if you take those away, you're left with features that are effective but not very expressive. A fairly bland, one trick class that won't be interesting, respected, or fun. This is our first of the four archetypal classes. Each of these four classes included about 24 features with a lot of repeats that always averaged out to a high C, so I tried to make some cuts down to the five most iconic features before assigning a rank. Each archetype gets their archetypal ability, and for Mystic, that is Strong Gift, which I've seen argued by some Symbaroomers is an essential pickup for any Mystic player to get the most out of their magic. So the mechanics land with a satisfying 8. The general fantasy of a mage is an 8. The lore will mostly respect you, but wish you would pick up a real title. But I landed the fun as a 6 because I just don't think it's very interesting to be a basic bitch mystic when you could either pick up a profession ability or just manage your corruption with a tradition. This is the first tiebreaker pick. Both Mystic and Wizard scored 7.83, but I gave the edge to the Wizard for being a more specific concept. I don't have a lot to say about Wizards in Symbaroum. It's a very evocative title for gamers, but the specifics of state sponsored magic within the setting hold this one back a bit from being what it could be. Just like in plenty of fiction, though, I do believe someone could build a better wizard that could easily dominate any battlefield or Ambrian royal court. Welcome to my first custom class. I noticed that while Symbaroum features some unarmed abilities, the books don't feature the monk archetype that is so popular for many gamers, so I wanted to fill that gap. I think most D&D nerds and video gamers picture a very Eastern-focused concept, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're being respectful of the culture you're drawing from and not just doing a bad Jackie Chan impression. I think a lot of people ignore that characters like Rocky Balboa and Black Panther are also monks. Plenty of cultures have martial arts that can be emulated in a role playing game. But my own inspiration for this character came together from a very different kind of martial art, that of professional wrestling. All of the other classes include multiple pop culture references, but for my own classes, I wanted to hone in on one concept. And for the monk, we are making Rhea Ripley. If you don't know who that is, type her name into the YouTube search bar after this, and you're welcome. We'll be taking the obvious natural warrior and wrestling abilities, then augmenting that with berserker. Recovery is a low rank, but seems like a flavorful pick given the D&D monk's ability to restore hit points and professional wrestlers' abilities to get back up to the roar of the crowd after taking a brutal beating. To round out the class, I threw out Steel Throw for when you can't close the gap and it's time to throw a chair. I think this is a really good fantasy and really fun to play, but the mechanics aren't totally impressive, and within the world of Symbaroum, you're going to get looked down on once you're exploring ruins and not in a cage match. I still think this is a respectable class I would totally play, but it belongs in C tier. The Gentleman Thief. What a name, what a concept. There's a few different forms this could take, which is why I didn't give it an outstanding 10 in fantasy. It has a respectable 8 within the lore since you're a noble with good persuasive and clout among multiple factions, but the fun doesn't really do it for me once you look at the abilities. The biggest disappointment here is without a doubt Mantle Dance, the Gentleman Thief's gift of the profession, coming in at a lackluster C. Plus, the art for this one is just kind of bad. I would love to see a player bring this concept to life with a better build and some boons and burdens. But as it stands in the book, Gentleman Thief just doesn't have the sauce. The spiritualist is an intriguing concept, also known as the White Witch, which should immediately evoke an image for any Final Fantasy players watching. The idea of being a master of life and death with the perspective of a wise healer is an appealing concept, and tormenting spirits is a well designed mystical power that brings the pain in combat. The spiritualist is fun and effective, and I'm using it as the basis for my big villain in my biggest Symbaroum game, but it's not quite where I want it to be. I discuss the dilemma of the Sapper in my advanced abilities tier list. The Sapper is a phenomenal idea if you're playing a siege campaign, and a terrible idea if you're doing anything else. For being classified as a rogue, which I don't totally disagree with conceptually, the Sapper's best abilities come in the form of its warrior aspects utilizing the alchemical fire tube as a two-handed bludgeon. I do think this is a very fun occupation in the right campaign, but the trick of finding the right conditions is what holds the Sapper back. The Inquisitor is essentially the advanced witch hunter, so it's fitting that it places significantly higher. The abilities and features of the Inquisitor are a mixed bag, but that diverse bag of tricks combined with the roleplay opportunities it opens up is exactly why I think it deserves a 10 in the fun score. Parts of the Inquisitor still carry the air of an elite NPC, but it does well enough at what it tries to do. We are closing out C tier with the archetypal witch. The thing is that bitches love witches. No matter how low their basic class might rank, plenty of players will be drawn to playing out a mage with equal capacity to heal and harm. On the one hand, a feared outsider, and on the other hand, a member of a dedicated coven of kindred souls. While this witch may be placing fairly low, we haven't seen the last of their kind. And that brings us into B tier. These are the good classes, something I think you could reliably play in any of your games to good effect, going strictly by the books. Let's get right into it. We start out B tier with a strong pick, the Green Weaver or the Green Witch. The abilities and flavor of this class should immediately evoke a potent concept, even if that concept doesn't come with the backing of being particularly powerful. I gave the Green Witch a 7 in fun because I think its abilities and themes are not quite one note, but definitely a single chord strummed over and over as you use plants to fight your enemies and you use plants to aid your allies. If you like druids and cottagecore, this pick is for you, but otherwise, you should go for a different witch. The Theurge. Theurg? Thurg? I'm going with Theurge. The basic Theurge takes on the role of the archetypal D&D cleric, a holy healer and support class that can dish out some decent damage as long as it's fighting abominations and undead. It's not a particularly strong fantasy or a high status in the lore, and as somebody who's played a lot of healers in a lot of games, I won't be alone in telling you it's not the most fun role to fill. Your Theurge might struggle to find an identity beyond the standard healing priest, unless that is you pick up one of the Theurge professions we'll see later on. The Sellsword is a horrendously drab player character concept with a surprisingly reliable mechanical kit. I'm not sure what else to say about it, so I'm moving on. Meanwhile, there's the stupendously unique concept of the troll singer, Symbaroum's take on the bard. For better or worse, the troll singer is very different from the typical memes and tropes of the D&D bard, meaning it will be a difficult class for players to latch onto, even if they like the idea of a singing skald guiding their allies to victory. There are a few other troll singing powers and weapon expression options not shown in this build, and I am definitely up for the challenge of making the best troll singer I can. That is, unless you beat me to it in the comments, a song I will happily listen to. The Mentalist gets a 10 in fantasy. There are loads of prominent mind mages, telepaths, and telekineticists in fiction, so it shouldn't be hard to find a player itching to play their own version in Symbaroum and have a great time doing it. Unfortunately, the Mentalist is held back by a few disappointing options in its class. If those options were scrapped and some other wizard powers were picked up, this concept could truly shine. I'm not gonna lie, I was surprised to see the basic rogue placed this high. Enough people are drawn to rogues in fiction, but typically as a deeper archetype like a spy or a smuggler. Rarely just, I want to be a rogue, please. The rogue does have some decent abilities to choose from, and I hope I did a good job picking the five I thought were the most iconic. The rogue is pulled down slightly by a 6 in lore because run in the mill thieves are pretty despised by every society in Symbaroum. The Berserker was basically required to be built into this Nordic dark fantasy RPG from the get go, and the designers did a great job with the premier Berserker mechanic. Berserker has its passionate fans, but within the lore and the greater gaming space, I think folks look down on wildfighters more than their tactical and clear headed companions. And like the Dungeons and Dragons barbarian, I think Symbaroum's Berserker is a one trick pony. However, it does that one trick very well, so I at least respect it. Calling your character a thug is just not a very great start and immediately shows contempt from the in game world. I do think this character type can be fun, with the Poisoner and Twin Attack abilities standing out, but Thug survives in B tier only because of the S tier Strangler ability. We arrive at our first hunter occupation. Hunters stand out from the typical big three fantasy trifecta of warrior, rogue, and mage, and they were only added in the advanced player's guide, which is why it makes sense that they place a little higher given the benefit of added time and scrutiny given to that book. The monster hunter gets 8s across the board, being a respectable but not too flashy concept in game and out of game. Combining melee polearm mastery and long range marksman makes you a force to be reckoned with on any battlefield, and everything about this class makes sense without reaching for something higher. In the tiebreaker between this and the Monster Hunter, I gave the edge to Runesmith for being a more evocative concept. I've encountered plenty of players across multiple RPGs who want to not only craft items, but use those items in combat as a sort of battlefield engineer. Runesmith does that effectively, with a nice piece of art to boot. Just look at all the gruff demeanor and grit this troll has. The Runesmith is held back by the Blacksmith ability, which I don't think is fun or all that effective to play out at the table when you could be better off letting an NPC craft your items and focus on wielding them instead. The Iron Sworn is a unique concept within Symbaroum lore, which I'm not going to get into here, but mechanically it amounts to an agile skirmisher that can freely switch between melee and ranged combat. While its fantasy is difficult to grasp given the cryptic language around the Iron Pact, at least within the non campaign core books, Iron Sworn is still a solid choice and one that could yield ripe roleplay results down the line. The Bounty Hunter is an undeniably cool concept, and I'm just surprised the designers didn't go all out with a more broad suite of features. What we have is not bad, it's just nothing at all special. Within the game, most societies will see you as a sellsword by another name, or at worst, a vile manhunter who captures other cultural beings with no remorse, which is why this gets a 6 in lore. Bonus points for the sassy art and actually giving us a dog, though. So, the basic ranger is actually presented in the core rulebook as a rogue archetype, before they made hunters a thing in the advanced player's guide. It's pretty in line with the D&D ranger. You're good with a bow, plus you have some mobility and nature knowledge. Nothing special, but still good. The captain does get the edge over the ranger for their leadership aspect. Leaders can come from any culture and be respected, although they can carry the effect of being just an elite NPC if you don't find a unique leadership style. The abilities are great, especially Dominate, and the entire class evokes a fun playing style that isn't all too incredible. Always a captain, but never a general. The duelist hosts a suite of reasonable abilities and flavor that's fine. I don't get the sense from the information presented in my books that Symbaroum has a robust society of duels and trials by combat, so the duelist seems to be more of a dexterity based skirmisher that takes on one foe at a time. That's neat, I guess. I just wish I liked duelist more. Now we come to something truly interesting. Once again, I had trouble finding cultural inspiration for this one, but I think that's more credit to the designers for establishing something one of a kind for the setting. Any witch or theurge, or even medicus, can heal toughness, but the confessor is a master against corruption, and that's a powerful statement in Symbaroum. I still think it falls into the trap of being a focused healer rather than an independent class, hence the low fun score, and there are a few middling powers and rituals, but the Confessor has real potential to turn the tables in your story. We close out B tier with a more evocative rogue occupation, the Charlatan. It's kind of a shame that Symbaroum doesn't express skills and background in its abilities. Then again, the boons and burdens system is pretty phenomenal, and I will have to dig into that more in future Symbaroum build videos. Still, the charlatan is reasonable at what it does, even if it's only a starting point and not the most fun or well respected occupation you can take. Now we are entering A tier. B tier was good, but now the game starts to get good. These are great classes you can easily play without any tweaking needed, and as you'll see later on, sometimes the S tier picks can be so strong that they can overwhelm the GM or take focus away from other party members as arguably overpowered picks, whereas the A tier picks hit the sweet spot of being very powerful but not game breaking. We start off A tier with the Knight, reliable, respectable, and satisfyingly tanky. At first, I was a little disappointed we didn't see the equestrian ability on this list, but I did put that one in C tier because you can't always bring your horse in a dungeon or a thick forest. As it is, the knight hits just right. The archetypal hunter has a very nice iconic ability with Hunter's Instinct, plus the usual ranged abilities and rapid fire, which I wish showed up more on this list. The mechanics are solid and fun. This is the perfect archer, lagging behind only because I think you'll want a little more spice on top of just being another archer in the Queen's army. Which brings us to the warrior. Possibly the most basic thing you can be in any fantasy role playing game, and yet, Symbaroum's version proves to be both fun and effective, threatening to tip the martial caster divide the other direction. As we've already seen, there are worse things you can be in this game than just the average grunt. Just like with Hunter, you'll want to add a little more spice, but I do think this is an incredible starting point for your next build. Necromancy is an incredibly potent fantasy, whether you want to play it straight as an evil overlord or try to play against type as a benevolent zombie mommy. Raise Undead and Deathlord are standout S tiers, and the rest of the features combine into something that's very fun and fulfills the promise of the name. Unfortunately, in the setting, you'll have to hide your undead prowess as a powerful sorcerer, but at least you'll be able to hold your own against whatever posse of witch hunters is foolish enough to take your bounty. The Blood Waiter or Red Witch is an interesting concept, falling just short of being iconic. This witch is meant to fight in the thick of melee combat with a combination of their own feral might and the help of animal companions. Great fun and great variety, with the only caveat being their lower capacity to take damage. I'm surprised we don't see Shapeshifter on this class since it seems like a bread and butter pickup, but I suppose the designers wanted us to have the fun of picking it out ourselves. Allow me to present my next custom class, this time for a mystic. We already saw the Confessor, but I wanted to make a combat healer that was a little less complex. Medicus, Holy Aura, and Lay on Hands were obvious pickups, with Theurgy rounding things out in the corruption department. But the concept of the class really came together when I remembered my old Overwatch main, Mercy. Stripping away the sci fi wings, Angela Ziegler would fit right in as a priest of the sun god while keeping herself protected with the levitate spell. Definitely a one trick and not too respected in the lore as just a healer, but the healing mechanics carry our angel through. And I'm not done yet. My next custom class is for the Hunter. I wanted a powerful archer using the Trick Shot ability, but I needed something unique to build around. So I picked up a horse and made a Mongol style horse archer, landing on Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke as the inspiration. All the fun of being a horse girl combined with the combat feats of Legolas makes for an exciting class I would be delighted to try. Up next is the wizard's DPS profession, the Pyromancer. This hardly needs an introduction. You know fire magic and you probably love fire magic. What you might not know are the two S tier abilities, Flaming Servant and Twin Servants, which doubles and then triples the power of your fireball lover with two bonus characters. Pyromancers are only held back by the general C tier rituals and a low lore score that I think is appropriate because you'll still be caught up in the internal politics of the Ordo Magica while taking orders as a dog of the military, but that shouldn't stop you from setting all your enemies ablaze. With our last tiebreaker, I gave the edge to the Staff Mage out of sheer novelty. Every setting has fire mages. Not every setting has a secret Jedi order who bind their souls to their staves to unleash world shaking magical effects. The fantasy of staff mages is a hard sell, and not every one of their abilities is incredible, but the overall package is truly impressive while not being overpowered. And now it's time for S tier, as well as the top 5 Symbaroum classes. Note that these are not necessarily my favorite classes, just the ones I had to concede by my own calculations were the strongest in mechanics and flavor. These are arguably overpowered picks that your table might want to nerf, but I personally believe they can still be a valuable part of the overall experience without making those tweaks. If you struggle with making a powerful build yourself and you want to turn on easy mode, you can start with one of these 5 classes. I'm honestly a little upset at how high up the tattooed warrior is. We all know a tattooed badass in fiction and likely in real life too, but that doesn't mean they should be at the top of the food chain. And yet, here they are. 4 A tier abilities that deliver a decent amount of fun while being a potent concept a notch above the average warrior. I will say that the rune tattoo ability is still one I haven't seen in game, so I could be proven wrong on it, but if my A tier assessment is correct, then Tattooed Warrior deserves this spot. And now we have my final custom class. I didn't set out to make an S tier class, but the concept sort of fell into my lap. I don't see Assassin in the books, I thought. A strong and storied fictional archetype somehow not represented. So I started with a John Wick inspired build, the Boogeyman, I called it. Symbaroum doesn't exactly have tight gunplay, and I already made a hand-to-hand class, so what is the most effective rogue ability for taking down a target, I asked. Well, that would clearly be the S-tier Strangler ability, but John Wick rarely chokes out a dude on his sleek killing sprees. Who does? What fantasy character regularly chokes their enemies? That's right, Darth Vader. Swap out the lightsaber for a greatsword, and you have a dark fantasy villain grappling with fate while teetering on the border between life and death, using mysterious powers and popping up to mow down his foes before they know what hit him. We're taking wizardry and mind throw for our force powers. We're taking unnoticeable to play up the rogue aspect for this class a little more, and we're rounding things out with tactician since we'll need a high cunning for strangler. My fellow Symbaroum game masters, this is my special gift to you. At your next game, please terrify your players with this top tier good guy killer. But the best is yet to come. You're seeing that right, folks. A full 10 on the flavor score. The Wrathguard sold me as soon as I read the name and saw the art, and things only got better as I read the mechanics and the lore. More than a wild barbarian, this honorable warrior gets stronger the more damage they take, a gimmick you've seen something like in plenty of video games, but rarely this well executed in a tabletop. The Wrathguard doesn't boast any S tier abilities, but I actually think that's pretty special, the fact that it can shine so much without being a mechanical problem. Speaking of mechanical problem, yes, we do have another full 10 score on flavor. Why, you ask? Because the Queen Spy is no mere government agent. They are a sophisticated, gadget wielding mastermind for which I think the cultural references here are 100% appropriate. Strangler, Pyrotechnics, and even Poisoner with the right dice rolls are all beyond deadly, breaking through the toughest enemy's armor and rendering them helpless as you move through the battlefield unseen and on your own terms. Play your items right, and you'll barely need to pull out a sword as you choke out your foes, whether it's for Queen and Country or Vengeance and the Night. And now we have our number one and an outlier. I knew when I started making this list that Templar would be placed pretty high, but I didn't think it would be number one, and I didn't think it would be by this much. However, here we have three S tier abilities, with possibly the most broken ability in the game in Armored Mystic, not because it can mow down a chain of foes, but because you can cast spells and swing a big ass sword while being untouchable, breaking the fundamental rule in many games that the highest tier mages shouldn't also be able to wear the highest tier armor. I actually docked Templar a point in the fantasy department because while the Holy Warrior is an insanely powerful concept, I recognize that a lot of people will be put off by the baggage of real historical Templars and the Crusades. But that couldn't hold this class down. The Templar is an absolute juggernaut, the ultimate paladin, and the final boss of this tier list. So, that's the list. All in all, I think the Symbaroum designers did a phenomenal job providing guidelines through interesting classes, and even the options I called D tier helped to establish what is possible in the setting. I was really worried about making this list with all the calculations involved, but I wound up having a lot of fun compiling and presenting the data. The most fun was getting to share my own classes. So, I'm not done yet. If and when this video gets 300 views, I will create 25 more classes to add to the tier list. These could be more ideas from D&D or popular media, my own concepts, or requests from you in the comments. If you want to see those classes sooner, give this video a like and share it with a friend. Symbaroum is a wonderful game, and it deserves a bigger audience so we can all work together to make it even better. Until next time, have a nat one day. Bye bye.